Engine Performance 2, Test 8. Everybody's, and that's going to be the primary.
Damn, it's all about voltage, isn't it?
Well, this right here has got to do with ignition systems. If you're into ignition systems, then you should probably get off on this. The primary low voltage ignition system must be working correctly before any spark occurs from a coil.
Yes.
Which component is not in the primary ignition circuit? The primary circuit on any
The wires.
the spark plug wire. That's right. That's D. The primary part of any is the one that triggers things to happen. The secondary is where the work is done. You got it? You're going to trigger the coil with your little wires, and your big wire that goes to the spark plug, that's going to be your secondary. On a relay, the coil is the primary, and the load carrying terminals is the secondary part of it, right?
Yep.
So anytime I'm showing you that, remember that? On that right there, coil, and that's common. This middle part of the relay on this particular kind of relay here is the secondary part. That's where the load is carried, and these outside ones are the coil. All right, and when the coil is what makes the middle ones go click. The ignition module has direct control over the firing of the coils in an EI system. Which components triggers the module?
All of them.
Pickup coil, crank sensor, computer. Distributor ignition systems can be triggered by a what?
All fixed.
Or
Magnetic.
either A or B, that's right. Magnetic sensor would be like one of the ones on that, like the one on that motor right there.
What's a compression sensor?
Yeah. All right. What now?
What's a compression sensor?
Pressure switch. Which one are you talking about?
Number 4, bro.
A compression sensing ignition system uses. Ooh, listen to that. Uses a uses a waste spark ignition system. Is that pretty cool or what? Well, some of the GM cars have that. It can actually tell which cylinder is on the compression stroke by what spark is happening. If the waste spark, see the waste spark waveform looks different because it's firing in the companion cylinders together, and so most of the energy is going to be directed to the cylinder that's firing because compression's in that cylinder, right? Okay, the other ones, it knows which cylinders are coming up. So when that spark is happening, it knows that cylinder's on compression stroke. Now I'll tell you what, some of them do. Some of these Volvo yo-yos, they actually send about 80 volts down that spark plug, and they look for that, to the compression to change that. And all that kind of, it's strange how they do that. Some of them people are doing that. I'm not going to. Oh, and I'm going to tell you something else too. Some of your little Kias.
Don't let me garbage.
Some of the little Kias. Listen to this. If you you might think, well, if I hook the spark plug wires up, since they're companion cylinders, I can hook them up either way. And the way that the little Kia, that little set of coils I got on that board over there is off of a Kia. So it's fairly easy to transpose 1 and 4. And you're thinking, since they're both firing at the same time anyway, what difference does that make? Well, it will make a difference on those.
Why?
Because I believe on those they're using compression sense. And it's going to screw up the timing of things. If you hook the wires up backwards to the daggum coil, Now, I may be totally rotten about that, but I do know it makes a difference, and I think you're going to see that on Nitafix. They talk about it doing crazy things. All right. You just got to be paying attention to how you hook it up. Ain't that right?
Yeah.
I like that neon. I run it on 2 cylinders after he put all that good. I was so confused by that I had him take all that timing cover stuff back off, make sure it was in time, and it was. He had it dead on the money. Okay. If the cam and crank sensor are slightly out, though, it'll cause them to do crazy things. All right, now then, we got coil polarity is determined by what? The direction of the coil windings. What's coil polarity mean? If you hook your ignition coil up backwards, the scope pattern you get on your scope will be upside down.
That's it.
Now, it doesn't really matter on an E-core ignition coil, but it did on the old round oil filled coils. And my dad was so good that he could look at the spark and tell you if the polarity was reversed on the coil. Yeah, he could pull that thing out and look at the spark. And he said, and I'd say, how do you do that, Dad? And he'd say, well, if you look at which way that little, you got a little, on the old spark on the old Volkswagen Bugs, you'd have a sort of a halo around the spark, and you inside the spark have a little tongue like that. And he said if that was pointing the opposite directions,
Oh, okay.
you know, he could tell on that one. Now, on the ones we're looking at now, you just see chain blue lightning, you know, pow. Something else about ignition systems, if that thing is not making some really serious heavy-duty sparks, I'm talking about, one of the first things I learned how to do when I first started troubleshooting drivability stuff is if I had a problem with a car that I was trying to figure out, I wanted to make darn sure that it had a spark that would scare me to death. I mean, I'm talking about a lightning hot, just super blue-white. And I would have people this guy that was really good, he had won some automotive competition out in Phoenix when he went out there, and he was working in the same, right across from me in the same stall. Sharp guy. I really liked the guy. I mean, he was no dummy. And he actually went to work for the city over there. And they had this pickup truck that came in there, and he says, we've checked for spark, and we've checked for fuel pressure, and we've checked for everything, and I don't know why this truck won't start, and we're out of ideas, you know. I'm going to have it dragged over and you see what I'm saying. So I grabbed my ignition coil, and I, you know, put my screwdriver in there, and I like to stretch the spark and let it see how far it'll jump, you know. And so I started out with it fairly close, and it starts jumping, and while they're spinning it, and I stretch it, and if I can stretch it about an inch, and it's popping, and I'm scared it's going to reach out there and get me, I know that's okay. Well, on this one here, I stretched it about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8, and then it went away. I said, we got a weak ignition coil. I put another coil on it, boom. And I taught, and see, they overlooked that because in your textbooks for years, it would tell you, it ought to jump 1/4 of an inch. That ain't enough, buddy. And 1/4 of an inch. And this one here, it ought to go about an inch. I mean, I ought to see it. And I had one that wouldn't jump at about probably 5/8 of an inch one time, and the car would start, but it started hard. It was a Taurus. And I worried that thing for a while, and finally I recognized the fact that the spark was almost strong enough, but not quite. And it started better when I got a hotter spark. See what I'm saying? How important that spark is? Here's something else. When Chelsea was putting them spark plugs in that Dodge truck, which was no easy job, by the way, because those things are bare, unplugging every coil was a pain. If you gap the spark plugs just a shade wider than it calls for, you're going to do better with that. While I'm thinking about it, while we're talking about ignition system, I'm telling you that. Donnie had come from Lincoln Mercury, and Donnie had about as many years in the field as I did, because he started when he was 15 in his daddy's car dealership. But he just always worked at car dealerships. Anyway, he come down there, and he was tuning up a van. And I says, and on that particular van, the VECI decal under the hood called for 42 thousandths of an inch on the spark plug gap. And I said, Donnie, you need to gap that at about 48 to 50, because if you don't, you know, you're liable to have a problem. And that's a van. And if you put it, you know, the gap lines, like if your gappers wore out and you're just a shade too close and all that. Some of the Ford specs had a gap that was just too close. And what would happen is, while this thing's idling, you're going to hear it go poo, 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 poo. You know, if it's dropping. That means typically a spark plug is partially fouled or the gap is too close. I mean, that's just all it means. Have you heard that before? Whereas, I mean, at exhaust pipe back here, you're hearing it go poo, 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 poo. I mean, it's not a steady pop, 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 pop. It's just like every now and then it's dropping a cylinder. You pull the plugs out, you spread the gap out to about 5 thousandths more than that VECI decal calls for. You're great. You know, that's basically, and that's for regular driving. That's the best way to go. Now, if you're on the racetrack and you're needing to have lots of duration on your spark, the more you spread it out, the taller the firing line, the shorter the duration is going to be. That's just all there is to it. However, if you don't have it wide enough, it ain't going to start good. Sometimes they foul the plugs. So there's a balance there. That's what multiple spark discharge is all about too. All right. Woo! I just sort of went on for a ways on that. This is important stuff though, because spark plugs are where we live. Ain't that right, Chelsea? You saw my head out on the bench, didn't you? Yeah, it's all wrapped in plastic and everything.
I was paying attention to nothing in the shop but that door right here.
Yeah, well, that's good. All right. The direction of the coil windings and that. Okay, now how does the waste spark ignition system fire the plugs? The same spark plug is always fired with straight or reverse polarity. And believe it or not, when you pull these spark plugs out, I got a picture of that on my Facebook page. When you pull these plugs out, if it's got coil packs where you've got the plugs firing two different polarities, the spark plugs that are firing straight polarity will look different from the ones that are firing reverse polarity. That's just the way it is. You're going to see 4 plugs that the ground electrode is worn up, you know. The ground electrode is more like this. In other words, don't be surprised if you pull 4 spark plugs that have been in there the same amount of time. You see what you got? You got this right here. And you know, whenever they're worn out, this gets kind of low and worn like that right there. And this right here. Well, if you see some that have a nice sharp here, but that's worn out, that's to be expected. But then you might see the ones on the other side where this still looks pretty good, but this is worn out. So you're going to see that on those waste spark systems because of the polarity of the qualifiers. The place where the spark's leaving, I believe, generally takes some ions with it. And so it's going to wear down that electrode. You see what I mean? Yeah. Those spark plugs Chelsea pulled out of that Dodge were horrible. They were worn slapped out. He really needed that. Sometimes when you pull plugs out, they don't look that much worse than what you pull
What's
in.
that diesel do? Yeah.
Huh?
Well,
What?
well.
What?
They're working at diesel welding or what? Dude with the Dodge. Welding.
Oh, yeah, he was a welding guy, yeah. He wasn't bad. We don't usually work on anything for diesel guys except they want tires fixed sometimes.
That's still pretty bad. They got to change spark
Yeah,
plugs.
but anyway, let me see here. Straight or reverse polarity, that's B. The pulse generator does what? It signals a module. That's what it does, basically signals a module. Two technicians are discussing distributor ignition. Technician A says a pickup coil or optical sensor in the distributor is used to pulse the ignition module. And technician B says some distributor ignition systems use an optical sensor.
Both of them, right?
That's both those guys. You know what an optical distributor is? You know how that works? Anybody know what an optical distributor is?
It's like a little fake box one that you set up in your vehicle. That way, if somebody wants to sabotage it, you know, and they sabotage the fake obvious one.
Yeah. Oh, what I give you. All right. Somewhere down here, I have one of those suckers. And I may have it in this other box over here. I may have the optical distributor over here. I don't know. I may have to find that darn thing. It was on this table right here for a long time. Yeah, it may be over here.
240 uses that.
Here it is. Here it is. Here it
It's
is.
got a laser in it, don't it?
This is an optical distributor right here. See that? See that optical distributor? It come out of Nissan Quest or something like that. I'm going to screw these screws out. I'm going to let y'all look at this. I'm going to send this around, okay? Because it's pretty interesting the way they build it. Now, these little holes that are cut in this sucker had to be cut with a laser. I don't know how in the world else they could do it. But right over here, underneath that plate and above that plate, you've got emitter and detector. Like, for instance, I've got this little thing right here that I built. And it sees light. It turns on the green light when I shine light into that. So this would be my emitter, that would be my detector. Imagine if that was shining all the time. And imagine I'm passing veins in between there. That little light's going to blink off and on, isn't it? Right? Well, this thing right here can actually see the infrared light too. See that? But you can see that with a video camera can see that, or this can see it, but you can't. All right. This one here is made that same way. I'm going to pass that around. I want you to look at that little disc, that little shiny disc. It's got all them slots in it. It's got a whole bunch of slots in the outer ring, and it's just got one wide slot and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's got 5. Every 120 degrees, it's got a slot and one of them wide. That is your cam sensor and your crank sensor right there where you're looking. That is a cool little piece of equipment. It's unusual for a distributor race, basically. But a lot of these Jap cars have got those on them. I think one of the reasons that more people don't use those is they're expensive to make. You know what I mean?
Well, they're expensive to replace too.
Well, they're not as bad as you'd think they'd be, really. I mean, because there's a lot of.
That'd be really hard to do.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it'd be hard to do that. You know, tell me how you're going to make something like that. You know, with those teeny tiny slots in it. Okay, now then, waste spark system. Okay, that was C, the other one there, but this one here, 9. The waste spark system, ignition fires what? All of the above. 1 spark with reverse polarity, 1 with straight polarity, and 2 spark plugs at the same time. Motorcycles did that for years. Technician A says that a 2-wire coil-on plug system uses the PCM to trigger the coil. Okay. A 2-wire coil-on plug system. Technician B says the 3-wire coil-on plug system uses an ignition control module built into the coil assembly. Which technician is correct? Both of those guys are correct. The ignition control module, you know, a lot of the stuff that these ignition systems, see this right here? This right here is a transistor that fires the ignition coil on I believe that came off of a Nissan. See that right there? If it had any moving parts here, you might think it was a throttle position sensor, but that is an igniter. That's what they call that. And if you took power and you put it in that middle one, it's basically a transistor. Put power in the middle and it's going to go pap, 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 that's going to fire your coil. The PCM sends signals to this little rascal and it fires the coil. And that's where that is, that's where it came from. And that little thing usually is pretty doggone robust.
So what's the marks on the outside?
The mark on the outside.
Yeah, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 of them.
You talking about every 120 degrees you got a mark?
I guess so.
Are those marks or are those slots?
Lots.
Yeah, that's for the cam sensor part of it, and the little ones, there's 360 of those other little slits. And at every single degree of movement is actually their signal coming from that. You can imagine what kind of a pattern that would put out on a scope, right?
What was number 10?
Yeah.
What was number 10?
Number 10, that's going to be both A and B. See, some of them, what they're trying to say is sometimes the PCM is just telling the coil to fire itself, and sometimes the PCM is firing the coil. So if it's a 2-wire cop system, like on a Ford, it's firing the coil. How many wires are going to the coils on these GMC? You got coil near plug, which has got a little short plug wire. There's 3 wires. It's actually got a little igniter, a little chip built into it, and so the PCM tells that thing to fire the coil. So that's what
On
they're
the
doing.
4.3s and the 5.7s.
Yeah, those are 4.8s.
Comes up from around the back 2 cylinders on the passenger side.
Yeah. But which statement below is correct? That one is going to be C. I'm not going to read all those statements. Most ignition systems work by switching the coil grounding the ignition coil's primary windings. How many of you guys have worked with MSD systems? Have you worked with any multiple spark discharges?
I got 2 of them.
Which side do they switch? The positive side. That's what's strange about those. They switch the positive side, not the negative side.
It was 11 and 12.
The ones that I saw did, huh?
It was 11 and 12, Steve?
11 is 2. I mean, A, you know. The ignition system split into how many different sections? 2 sections, primary and secondary. Sorry about that. Which of the following terms is specified by the Society of Automotive Engineers as the term describing an ignition system that does not have a distributor? Yeah, that's an SAE thing.
EIO.
The J1930 regulation is another SAE thing. The J2788 spec is for air conditioning machines. When you see these J numbers, like the SAE people put out, that's basically a spec that they've written for a particular piece of equipment or a particular terminology or whatever. They wanted the DLC connector is a part of it, and they've got different networks, and they've got J1850 and J, this, that, and the other. And I wish I had all this stuff. I wish if I had all this stuff memorized, I would sound really smart. Okay, now then, let's see. Ignition system pickup coil or trigger is usually connected to what? The module. The module. Not the pickup coil. Not connected to the rotor. Please.
Okay.
Those rotors, all these things that have rotors, if the rotor burns through, instead of it going out to the end and jumping out the plug, if the rotor burns through, what does it do? On the old Chevrolets, it wouldn't start. If it burns a hole in that, like if people wait too long to change their spark plugs, other things fail because the resistance goes up and up and up, and the ignition system's got to work harder and harder and harder. You don't wait till it starts skipping before you put plugs in it. You don't wait until your system, your cooling system is all clogged with rust before you flush the cooling system, right? You don't wait until your engine oil turns into tar before you get an oil change. But some people do that.
How often are you supposed to change your spark plug?
On some of them, it's 100,000 miles. Years ago, whenever I first started mechanicking, it was 12,000 miles. And in the 1930s, you'd have to overhaul the engine every 10,000.
Yeah, change the rings out.
The old Bonnie and Clyde cars, you had to put rings and stuff in a Bonnie and Clyde car about every 10,000 miles. Needless to say, things are better now than they used to be about that.
Right.
Okay, and we even have radios in our cars now.
Yeah, I love radios.
Which is the term used to create high voltage using low voltage?
Electromagnetic induction.
Yeah, that's good. Technician A says the primary and secondary ignition systems are never connected.
Oh, crap.
Technician B says the primary and secondary windings are connected in some ignition coils. Technician B is right. Technician A is not. Now, on the reason I'm going to say that, watch this. On your old oil-filled coils, like the the old round ones, and also on the other ones that are just got one coil. You know, this one here is basically going to be connected. These two windings, this winding is going between these two little wires, and the winding that's actually on that one is actually, these two windings are tied together on one end. See what I mean? But on your ignition, your coil pack ignition, it looks like this.
Yeah, you drew this yesterday.
They're not touching each other on those. See, they do it a different way. I mean, if you look at a schematic of those coils, that's the way they're set up. So that's what they're talking about. On the older ones, it's just got one coil. They are tied together. On the other ones, they typically aren't. Incidentally, you know...
Like a transformer.
Huh?
Looks kind of like a transformer.
It is a transformer. That's what a coil is. The ignition coil is a transformer. It takes 12 volts and jumps it up to 100,000. That's basically how you're going to do that. But on the coil on plug stuff for your, and like I say, he's probably got some good stuff to check those with. You can take a spark tester and you take your coil on plug coils, like the ones you on the Fords and stuff. You know, the Ford coil on plug coils. If you're, let's say that you don't have one that's going to tell you exactly, you can't get accurate misfire information, or for whatever reason, maybe you don't even have a scan tool, and you just want to know which one of these coils is not firing. If you take that coil and you take your spark tester, the adjustable one, and you know you're going to hook it to engine ground, and then you're going to plug it into the coil, and you dial it out till it's about 7/8 of an inch or something like that, and then you're going to just stand the coil up and let it fire that way. Then it's actually going to, if the one that won't fire is your bad one, and you can check them one at a time. I had a whole box full of them coils out there, and I usually would let people, when you guys get that engine put back in that Crown Victoria, we can resume this. You know what I'm saying? That's going to happen today, isn't it? Yeah, all right. But
So get those studs out?
yeah, we got 3 of them out. One of them we drilled it all, and there's a crescent-shaped piece of steel in there that's giving us a hard time. You know what's left of the bolt? You know that little piece of the bolt that's left. We're fighting trying to get it out. It's a pain. But I know that Matt and Jeremy have it in them after they changed that decant cable that Jeremy broke. And they'll be able to get that out, right?
So we got to change that too?
You got to do that because she has to drive that truck.
I was going to give it to Sean.
It's only fair for you guys to have to do it since y'all broke it.
I was going to give it to
Right.
Sean for his
Yeah.
birthday.
Oh,
Oh,
I've been for a long time, so you don't have to worry about that.
yeah, Sean's got plenty to do. Technician A says the primary coil has more windings. No, he's not right. Technician B says the secondary coil has more windings. Now, why would they write Technician A and B questions where these guys are saying opposite things and 2 of their choices are both and neither? You know what I mean? Now, the neither I can understand, but not the both. Both of them can't be right on some of these. Which statement below is correct? No voltage is induced in a secondary circuit. That's dead wrong. Turning off the low voltage primary coil induces a high voltage in the secondary winding. When you break the points, pop. You get an ignition pop. Okay, 19. The primary coil, let's go on. That's going to be D. The primary coil windings are designed for higher current, 2 to 6 amps. 2 to 6 amps. You got that?
What was number 18?
Which one?
You like just don't even do this.
Somebody else?
What was 18?
Choices.
What?
Tell us the answer letter. The letter of the answer.
No, that's going to be the.
You lost me at like 17. I think it was B, and 18 was.
Well, you were right. I didn't lose you.
Now what about 18?
Yeah. 18 is turning off the low voltage primary coil induces the high voltage in the secondary windings. That's B. Which electronic component inside the ignition module opens and closes the primary ignition circuit?
The diode.
It's a transistor, you guys. You know better than that. Which switching device is used below and also cause a magnetic pulse generator? That's pickup coil. Makes a little wiggle on your scope, right? Which switching device uses a shutter blade and sensor? That's a Hall effect switch. Which switching device uses an LED? Optical sensor, that thing I passed around, right? Technician A looks for engine speed when cranking an engine, it will not start. Let me tell you briefly, you can take the crank sensor wires and transpose them on a Ford, like we got this Ranger or whatever. Plug your scan tool in, you'll spin it over, you'll start to see RPM signal, and then it'll drop to nothing, and it won't fire. You switch it off, you spin it again, you'll start to see RPM, it'll drop to nothing, it won't fire. But if you switch in wires and hook up right, it'll fire right up.
You better watch that for a bug.
You better watch it. Watch out for a bug. Sometimes I tell these guys this, and I plant exactly the bug I just told them about, and they're sitting here scratching their head saying, what's wrong? What's this one here? Right. Okay. Now then, which switching device creates its own electrical voltage pulse?
Pickup coil.
Pickup coil. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped over 24. Technician B says the problem in the primary circuit can make the tachometer not work. Yeah, they're right. Both of them guys are right. Tachometer won't work. I remember I had a Corvair, a 63 Corvair Spider, and the tachometer didn't work. And I said, and that's one of the first cars I ever had. And I said, Dad, why don't the tachometer work on this car? And he just fumbled around back there and hooked that wire up to the negative side of the coil, and it wasn't working. I thought that was magic. I didn't have any idea what made a tach work in those days, but it hooks up to the negative side of the coil. That's where a tach hooks up. And it, All right, now then, I'm going down here. Let's see, what number am I on?
26.
26. Well, how many ignition coils should you expect to find on a V6 engine using a waste spark system? Waste spark is the coil pack, right? You're going to have how many? 3 if it's a V6. You're going to have 3 coils. You have to have 2 coils. 1 coil per 2 cylinders. Right? It'll have half as many coils as it has cylinders. Technician A says a waste spark system uses 2 spark plugs at the same time. We've already been there. Technician B says a waste spark ignition system uses ignition coils connected to companion cylinders. Both of those guys are right. Technician A says the ignition timing cannot be adjusted on waste spark ignition systems. Well,
They can't, really.
he's kind of right, but I can give you a caveat on that. Technician B says most waste spark systems use a crankshaft position sensor. And both those guys are supposed to be right on that one. How would you change the ignition timing if you absolutely had to?
On like a GM car?
No, like on one that had a, coil pack.
You'd have to change the where the cam run and sync it with a different spot in the crankshaft, and you probably have to get a different crankshaft and pull around with the valve, I'm pretty sure.
No.
And you'd have to adjust the ignition timing to work off that too.
Like you just, if I wanted to mess you guys up and I wanted to change the ignition timing so that it was slightly different and would make the car run bad, how could I do that? If I did something to either change the position of that crank sensor, if I could move it in one direction, that would change the timing. Or if I could re-index that wheel. You could actually build a pulse ring that you could actually adjust it to a limited amount to change the timing if you wanted to. Nobody does that I know about. But on some of the Jeeps that had the crank sensor, when you did altitude modification, there was a ground wire you were supposed to hook up over there. It was taped back. You took that ground wire up and you put a different crank sensor on there that would give you 8 degrees more time in advance. The cam sensor was indexed differently on this little bracket. You know what I'm saying? So crank sensor. If that crank sensor is indexed different where it's reading off that wheel, you're going to have different ignition timing. But like I told you on your Escort, if somebody didn't tighten that balancer on the Escort good, if they just tighten it with a wrench, and that little balancer with that little pulse ring on it starts flopping back and forth, it'll go boom, and the timing will be late, and it'll go, and then it'll move back the other way, and it'll go, ooh. You'll have good power, bad power, good power, bad power, because of that gun ignition timing moving around. I've seen that a bunch of times. When I'd run into that, I'd be checking air filters and all kinds of crap, see if something's jumping up in front of the mass airflow. Then you get down there and you take that, just loosen that bolt a little bit on your, find out it ain't very tight, and you can grab that balancer and go, don't, 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 don't. That's the whole problem. On a little, any car like that doesn't have a press-on balancer that where you just spin it off. If that little pulse ring is on that balancer, it can move around. And on those Toyotas, it's just got little blades instead of them substantial teeth like that Ford's got on. If you fool around and break one of those little suckers off, you'll have a no start. It'll be one for the Univac, boy. You break one of them little tabs off, it'll pop and snort and cut up, and sometimes it may start, and sometimes it may not.
You're talking about something like that system that Dodge 4.7 used around the cams.
Well, that's a little Hall effect thing, but like on that little Mazda engine that's out here on the stand, you might notice that little toothed ring on the front of that thing, it's just little tiny blades or little skin, this little thin metal, and then Toyota's the same way, it goes past that. And if somebody is not really gentle with those things, they can break them suckers off. I mean, you can break off a doggone tooth off of that thing, and you'll have a record-breaking no start. They'll go all over town trying to find out why that thing won't start. Unless somebody hooks a scope up to it and knows what the pattern's supposed to look like, and they'll pick it out right then. Like a missing tooth, bam, it's going to show up on your scope, right? And I told a story about that one time. That guy from Pennsylvania called me about one of those, because of motor age stuff. And he had broke one of them little suckers off. I kept telling him, hook a scope up and see what your crank sensor looks like. He never would do it. He had a scope, but for some reason he didn't want to go to trouble to hook it up. And he worked on it a month. And when he finally found it, he found out he had broke off one of them little teeth, and he just happened to never see it when he was looking down there because it was hard to see. when he finally figured that out, he's kicking himself because if he'd hooked the scope up the day I told him to a month earlier, he'd have fixed that car that day. The scope is really important in situations like that. Okay, let's show you.
9.
What?
9.
9? 29. Which of all these terms have been used to describe communication between the ignition module and PCM except what?
Spout.
No, that's spark output. DIS. Electronic spark timing is D. When you got spout. Okay, technician A says in the bypass mode, the ignition system is timed by the ignition module. What does that mean? You know, in your Chevrolet pickup trucks, they got a little wire that's tan with a black stripe. That you unplug it to set the timer. If that's bypass mode. That's like the spout connector on a Ford. If you unplug a spout connector on a Ford, you're taking a computer out of the loop. And what you do with the distributor is going to determine where your timing is. Now, if it's one of these CSFI systems, it's got the spider fuel injection under there. If you turn the distributor on those, all you're going to do is screw things up because you can't set the timing on them. But you can set the cam, the cam retard offset with a scan tool.
Yep. You got to snap the throttle.
Well, you got to hold it over 1,000. What? All right. The following statements are all correct except what? No ignition system uses the PCM to control ignition timing. That is a laugh. We got 3 questions left, and then we'll be in the shop.
30.
Yeah, I missed number 30. I'm sorry. Technician A says in the bypass mode, the ignition system is timed by the ignition module. Technician B says in bypass mode, the ignition system does not use the PCM to time spark plug firing. Well, you got to figure that would have been C. Because you're taking a PCM out of the loop in that mode. Waste spark ignition is being discussed. Technician A says that more voltage required to fire the... This sounds exactly like something you'd see on an ASE test, by the way. Be aware of that. This may be something you'll see on an ASE test. Or something like this. Waste spark ignition is being discussed. That's got ASE written all over it. Technician A says more voltage is required to fire the compression cylinder than the companion cylinder. Companion cylinder being the one that's not on compression, right? Technician B says waste spark system use compression sensing electronics do not require a camshaft sensor for engine position. That's right. They're using compression sense to make sure of that.
Both of them right.
Both of them guys are right. And number 33, which is our next to the last question for today, which statement below is correct? That's number D. Coil on plug system use one ignition core. Huh?
D's a letter.
What?
D's a letter.
Yeah, D's a letter, dude.
Except number D.
Well, that works.
It's all right, it works.
These guys are grammar Nazis. I'm usually correcting people's grammar. They corrected mine this time. They get really irritated with me on something like all these shoot 'em up games online. Like Call of Duty. If I correct their grammar, they really get hot with me about that.
See, Richard, that'd be work. When I'll be sitting there taking somebody's order, there's letters in the menu and numbers. Somebody would be like, I want the number D, and I'm like, what is that?
Yeah. Which of the following? How do you make a capital 2, right? Okay. All of the following statements are correct except what? Knock sensors require voltage input from the PCM to function properly. What is a knock sensor? What is it for? Tell me what a knock sensor is for, and we'll be done. Come on. Somebody tell me. Don't jump and run. Tell me about a knock sensor. What does it do? What is it for?
It senses knocks.
Why do you need to know about this?
So you can correct your ignition number.
Yeah, your labor knock. If it's labor knocking, you're going to retard the ignition time and make labor knock go away. PCM does that automatically. But why does it not need voltage?
I don't know.
Creates its own. It's a quartz, got a piezoelectric sensor in it. A piezoelectric quartz chip in it. And when you squeeze quartz, it makes voltage. Yeah. And if you feed voltage to quartz, it oscillates. That's how come they got the little crystal oscillators that are made. They got quartz crystals in them. Squeeze it make a spark. You know these little things that you snap for your lighter? That's kind of like the quartz works like that. Whenever you squeeze it, put pressure on that quartz, bam, a spark comes out of it. Pretty cool stuff.